First of all, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Volume 6, of the 6,000 series, which is Uniting to the World. And so this is the second last chapter. And Krishna is the great soldier. Last chapter being the final lesson. So Prabhupada had just returned to Vrindavan, and devotees are coming to see him. And it seems obvious that he's not going to be physically getting any better. During one of the long kirtans, Brahmananda Swami was present and Srila Prabhupada called him forward. He wanted to give him last instructions about Africa. Prabhupada was lying down, and Brahmananda had to put his ear near Srila Prabhupada's mouth to hear. The other devotees in the room also hushed and came as close as possible. With Nava Yogendra, Prabhupada said in a hoarse whisper, the both of you, South Africa also. There, gradually, the people are try to bring Krishna back. He's very competent. So jointly organize Africa. Have Sankirtan, all Europeans, Americans, Africans. Talasi Das is very competent also. United Nations under Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's flag, if it's possible. Otherwise, that United Nations will simply be a false attempt. Said that when you first came to New York, replied Brahmananda, urgently recalling his first days with Srila Prabhupada, you went to the United Nations. The very first day I came to the kirtan there in New York. The next day you went there for that peace vigil outside the United Nations, and you were chanting Hare Krishna and saying that this Krishna consciousness is the only method for making United Nations. That's a fact, said Prabhupada. Try for the protection of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all things will be successful. Others, they will simply waste time and be disappointed and change the body and suffer. Prabhupada changed the subject, but Brahmananda was satisfied. He had been given enough service for many lifetimes. Srila Prabhupada ki. Yeah. If only they would listen. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 18, Text 27. This chapter is entitled The Residents of Jambudweep Offered Prayers. Yam Lokapala Kila Matsara Jvara Yamlokapala Kilamatsarajvara Hitva Yatanto Api Pritak Sametya Cha Hitva Yatanto Pi Pritak Sametya Cha Patum Na Shekur Dvipadash Chatushpada Patum Na Shekur Dvipadash Chatushpada Sarishripam Stanu Yad Atra Drishyate Sarishripam Stanu Yad Atra Drishyate Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Hiva Yatanto Pi Pritak Samitya Cha Hiva Yatanto Pi Pritak Samitya Cha Patum Nasekur Dvipadash Chatushpada Patum Nasekur Dvipadash Chatushpada Sarisripam Stanu Yad Atra Drishyate Sarisripam Stanu Yad Atra Drishyate Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Hitvaya Tanto Pi Pritak Sametya Cha Patum Nasekur Dvipadash Chatushpada Sarisripam Stanu Yad Atra Drishyate. Please chant.
Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara
Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Hidvaya Tanto Pi Pratak Sametya Cha Hatum Nasheku Dvipadash Chatushpada Sarishripam Stanu Yadat Sadrishyate Shishkuntai Mapashachki Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Pratak Sametya Cha Anyone else?
Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara Hipaya Tanto Vipritak Sametya Patum Dashiko Dvipadashchatuspada Sadarishvipam Stanu Yada Pradrishyate.
Ladies.
Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara
Yamlokapala Kila Matsarajvara
Hipaya Tanto Vipritak Sametya
Hipaya Tanto Vipritak Sametya
Patum Nasheko Dvipadashchatuspada
Patum Dashiko Dvipadashchatuspada
Sarishvipam Stanu Yada Pradrishyate
Sadarishvipam Stanu Yada Pradrishyate.
Yam Hum You Lokapala the great leaders of the universe beginning with Lord Brahma Kila what to speak of others Matsarajvara those who are suffering from the fever of envy
those who are suffering from fever are envy.
Hitva, leaving aside.
Leaving aside,
Yatanta, endeavouring.
endeavoring,
Api, although. Pritak, separately.
separately,
Sametya, combined. Cha, also. Patum, to protect. Na, not. Sheku, able. Dvipada, two-legged. Chatupada, four-legged. Sarisrapam, reptiles. Stanu, not moving. Yat, whatever. Atra, within this material world. Drishyate, is visible. Srila Prabhupada's translation. My Lord, from the great leaders of the universe, such as Lord Brahma and other demigods, down to the political leaders of this world, all are envious of your authority. Without your help, however, they could neither separately nor concertedly maintain the innumerable living entities within the universe. You are actually the only maintainer of all human beings, of animals like cows and asses, and of plants, reptiles, birds, mountains, and whatever else is visible within this material world. Please repeat, my Lord, from the great leaders of the universe, such as Lord Brahma and other demigods, down to the political leaders of this world, all are envious of your authority. Without your help, however, they could neither separately nor concertedly maintain the innumerable living entities within the universe. You're actually the only maintainer of all human beings, of animals like cows and asses, and of plants, reptiles, birds, mountains, and whatever else is visible within this material world. Srila Prabhupada's purport. It is fashionable for materialistic persons to compete with the power of God. When so-called scientists try to manufacture living entities in their laboratories, their only purpose is to defy the talent and ability of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is called illusion. It exists even in the higher planetary systems, where great demigods like Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and others reside. In this world, everyone is puffed up with false prestige, despite the failure of all his endeavours. The so-called philanthropists who supposedly want to help the poor are approached by members of the Krishna conscious movement. They say, "You are simply wasting your time while I'm feeding vast masses of starving people." Unfortunately, their meagre efforts, either singly or together, do not solve anyone's problems. Sometimes so-called swamis are very eager to feed poor people, thinking them to be Daridra Narayan, the Lord's incarnations as beggars. They prefer to serve the manufactured Daridra Narayan than the original Supreme Narayan. They say, "Don't encourage service to Lord Narayan. It is better to serve the starving people of the world." Ultimately, such materialists, either singly or combined in the form of United Nations, cannot fulfill their plans. The truth is that the many millions of human beings, animals, birds and trees, indeed all living entities, are maintained solely by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hiko bahunam yo vidadati kaman. One person, the Supreme Lord, is supplying the necessities of life for all other living entities. To challenge the authority of Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the business of asuras, demons. Yet sometimes suras or devotees are also bewildered by the illusory energy and falsely claim to be the maintainer of the entire universe. Such incidents are described in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Regulative Goswami tells how Lord Brahma and King Indra became puffed up and were eventually chastised by Krishna. Om Agyanatimarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chachurmalitam Hena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vakam karoti vachalam pangam lagate girim yakripatamaham bande shigrim dinataranam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. My Lord, from the great leaders of the universe, such as Lord Brahma and other demigods, down to the political leaders of this world, all are envious of your authority. Without your help, however, they could neither separately nor concertedly maintain the innumerable living entities within the universe. You're actually the only maintainer of all human beings, of animals like cows and asses, and of plants, reptiles, birds, mountains, and whatever else is visible within this material world. So many nice points Prabhupada makes here in the purport. So first of all, Srila Prabhupada mentions here it's fashionable for the materialistic persons to compete with the power of God. And because the people in general tend to follow a trend, just like I think it was Jai Sachi the other day was giving class, and there was some kind of some psychological visual comparison of things. There was a group of people who were selected, I think it was 5 of them, and they had to say if they thought this line equaled the line on that side. And what one of the person didn't know was that the other 4 were actors who were set up to say the opposite. So, and because he was the last one, even though according to his eyes this one looked thinner than that one, and because they all said no, it's the same, then he said the same. So it just goes to show that yad yad acharati shreshthas. People are looking to follow. They want somebody to follow, and even if it's wrong according to their senses, they'll still follow. Then we can say, oh, that's crazy. He should have just trusted himself. So that tendency is there in human society, as we want to follow the flock, want to find some security in following the flock. And that's okay if you actually are following a leader who's not going to mislead you. Even Prabhupada himself said that I follow blindly. In other places, he would say blind following is discouraged. But Prabhupada has so much faith in his spiritual master that basically he knows that whatever his spiritual master says, he can fully depend on him. So when you come to that point of being fully convinced and fully surrendered, then you can follow blindly. But until then, if there's one is encouraged when one approaches a spiritual master, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya pradikshanti te jnanam jnaninas tatvadarshana. Krishna recommends that one should try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. So first of all, we have to approach. It's not that we'll sit there waiting on the spiritual master coming knocking on our door. I'll get initiated when Krishna arranges it. If the spiritual master comes to my house and said, okay, I'm here. No, so we have to approach. We have to make the endeavor. We have to take the first step, and then Krishna will take many steps. He'll make many arrangements. So we have to approach a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively. So a submissive inquiry, Prabhupada says, not challenging. So there's 2 ways to answer a question. One is to find out what is the answer. And the other one is to try to disprove what the person is saying. So submissive inquiry means we're trying to find some answers to the problems of life. But if someone thinks they know the answer already and they're just trying to be a nuisance, then they ask in a challenging mood. And if we listen to Prabhupada's lectures, then he was definitely up for the challenge. He was undefeatable. It's so encouraging when you hear sometimes people are posing questions to Prabhupada and you wonder, how's he going to answer this one? Or how would he answer that? And before you have the time to think, Prabhupada's right on it. And he puts it right. Just like one boy was saying, well, I don't think I have to bow down to anyone. I don't think anyone should bow down to me. I think we're all more or less equal. Prabhupada said, very good. You've diagnosed your own disease. So expert. He didn't say, oh, you nonsense. You're wrong. He very cleverly said, he he glorified him for being so intelligent that he was able to diagnose his own disease. He didn't even realize, and then he had to take the credit for it. And then Prabhupada says, actually, you're bound, and then he turned it around. Actually, you're bound down to so many things. You're bound down to birth, death, old age, disease. You cannot say no to any of these things. But if you bow down to Krishna, then you're not forced to bow down to these things any longer. And Prabhupada says, this is what I'm giving. One person was saying, I think it was the same class, he says, but actually the scientists, they're curing so many diseases. Srila Prabhupada says, yes, but can they cure disease? So they cure one thing, but something else comes up. And they're finding that, some years ago, the antibiotics was like the cure-all for everything, whatever you've got. And still, even you go to the doctors, whatever's wrong with you, antibiotics. They've got about 3 medicines there, and it's going to be one or the other, regardless of what's wrong with you. And but they're finding when people are overloaded with these things, then simple things they can't even be cured from. Even your own immunity system can't handle it. So there's no cure-all in the material world. The only cure-all is to get out of the material world. This is what Prabhupada is encouraging us to do. But he was saying it's fashionable for materialistic persons to compete with the power of God. So at all costs, no matter how far they look into the universe with their telescopes, and how many they think they've sussed it out, and then they realize actually there may have been something before the Big Bang, because we're discovering things which could have been existing before that. So they're thinking like that now. But prior to that, then it was Big Bang of an infinitesimal, infinitely dense particle. But not that, regardless of what it is, how far they look out to the universe in their telescopes or how far they look into it in their microscopes, regardless of what they see, because they've got imperfect senses, then they still won't come to a perfect conclusion. Other people, when they look into the construction of a cell, for example, and they see that all these parts could not have evolved because they all have to be there for it to work. It's just like with an engine, you can't have some pistons and a block, but no carburetor. And then just gradually somehow another carburetor will come in. The whole thing has to be there. You take one part off, it doesn't work. The same with the construction of a cell. So then those who are intelligent realize, well, this is intelligent design. This there's no way this could have came together by evolving from one thing, because there's nothing simpler than that. There's not like a pre-cell stage which worked and then another bit added and another bit. It has to have all these components to work. But still, they mock. This is the way they deal with it. Anybody who comes up with something which may point to some higher consciousness, higher being, some supreme being, then they just laugh as if it's some kind of medieval blind faith. But we can ask the same question. So what is the cause of your Big Bang? Where did your infinitely dense, infinitesimal particle come from? What would cause that to be there out of nothing? So with Srila Prabhupada's common sense, we don't have to study all these things in great detail, but with common sense, for example, if you read that book, Life Comes from Life, Srila Prabhupada shows very simply how we can defeat with common sense. We don't have to learn, for many, many years to go and learn their lingo. Sometimes the scientists use big words to try to bewilder us with science, and we think, oh, they're using big words, I don't know what they mean, so they must be more intelligent than me because they seem to know what they're talking about. But if we take it back down to simple terms, then they're word jugglery. They're like the modern Mayavadis, very good at word jugglery. And of course, their arguments will be, oh, you're just oversimplifying it. It's more complicated than that. But it's not. If it doesn't make common sense, then it's not going to wash. It may be there for some time. So interestingly, in one morning walk, one time Prabhupada was discussing about the scientists, and one devotee said, oh, they've been cheating since time immemorial. And Prabhupada said, no, not time immemorial, only the last 200 years, and soon it will be finished. Because they're also having to depend on people's blind faith. But when people become, just like people have rejected many different standard religions because it doesn't make sense to them, it doesn't relate to them. So similarly, when people become enlightened, they're not going to be controlled by fear, by poverty, things like that. They're too smart for that. So similarly, when people become more enlightened, they'll understand that the scientists are bluffing. Now, of course, that doesn't mean to say that everything the scientists are doing is useless, bogus, etc. Otherwise, we wouldn't be using microphones, and we wouldn't be living in a building. Science is engaged in all these things, and the sciences are there in the Vedas. But what's the purpose of it all? That's the main thing. What's the conclusion of it? And what is the use of it? If it's used in connection with Krishna, then it's not a source of entanglement, because it's all Krishna's energy. And we learn in Bhagavad Gita that the material energy is endlessly mutable. So that means that people, if they feel like they want to keep on inventing things and invent, that's fine, but do it for Krishna. If you want to look into see how the universe is constructed, that's fine. That's called Sankhya. Sankhya means to count. So there was philosophers who used to count all the elements, and we'll find that in the Bhagavatam pages. So if people have that tendency, then they can follow that tendency, but if their motivation is simply to compete with the power of God, then they will meet with frustration, because they cannot compete. Just like we have this coronavirus, one little virus, and everybody's really worried about how things are going to get back to normal. But what they call normal is not normal for the soul anyway. It's very abnormal. We're like a fish out of water, and the fish is out of water, and he's in illusion, thinking that, well, I'll just have a cigar and a glass of wine and an ice cream, and then someone says, there's no ice cream, but I just want my ice cream so things can get back to normal, because that's what he's used to. But then someone says, you don't need all that, just get back in the water. So for devotees, we shouldn't be in anxiety, because ultimately we don't belong here anyway. We do our best to maintain body and soul and whatever Krishna has given us, so we can use it in Krishna's service. If Krishna gives, then we take that and we use it in Krishna's service. And if he takes away, we realize, okay, Krishna's decided to take something away. And then we patiently just wait to see what is the next stage in the plan. And here it's mentioning also, when scientists try to manufacture living entities in the laboratories, their only purpose is to defy the talent and ability of the Supreme Person of Godhead. This is called illusion. So try to compete with the Lord as illusion. And what do? They're just like Prabhupada describes, that the child is conceived in the test tube of the scientists, but God's test tube is in the womb. That's nature's test tube. So they're not doing anything, they're just trying to copy. No, they're taking the ingredients which are already provided. They're not taking something from nowhere and making something. They want credit, but they won't give credit. So this is called envy. That not only, it's not even jealousy. Apparently the difference between jealousy and envy is, if you're jealous of someone, it's like, I wish I had that too. If you're envious of someone, it's like, I wish I had that and that they didn't have it. So I want to be the Supreme Controller, and God, I just want him not to exist, because I want to be the God. And this is why we're in the material world, God's competitors. And in our own little way, we're trying to be controllers. And yet, we find there's so many things happening out with our control. And sometimes that can be very frustrating. And then sometimes I actually have to laugh at it and think, I'm such a fool. How many times is Krishna going to have to show me this before it gets into my thick head that I'm not the controller? And it's such a relief. I remember one devotee, he was a very senior devotee, but he just wanted to be a simple devotee. He had a lot of burden on his shoulders. And at one point, he took an opportunity to give it up. And I met him in Vrindavan, and he was chanting, and he just looked so happy. He said, "Oh, I just want to be a simple devotee. I'm tired of trying to be the controller." So even if we all have some kind of Ishvara bhav, some tendency to want to control, we can use that in Krishna's service. But we have to bear in mind that Krishna is the Supreme Controller. And if he doesn't want something to happen, it won't happen. And if he wants something to happen, then it will happen. Krishna is never frustrated in his endeavors. Like sometimes we're frustrated because we're not the supreme controller and there's other controllers around us who may be better manipulators or maybe more influential or stronger speakers. In the later cantos of Bhagavatam, it's explained that in Kali Yuga, if there's an argument, whoever shouts the loudest wins the argument. Or sometimes whoever speaks first, not necessarily the truth. So Prabhupada makes the point here that even in the higher planetary systems, great demigods like Brahma, Shiva, and others reside. This is going on. Of course, Shiva is in a different category, but Prabhupada gives the example of, later on, he talks about Lord Brahma and King Indra became puffed up and were eventually chastised by Krishna. So when we find ourselves being frustrated in our endeavours, we may take that as Krishna's chastising us. He's saying, stop being a nonsense. You can't control this. This is beyond you. You know, everybody else has a right to their point of view as well. It's just like someone the other week was trying to force me to accept their opinion. And of course, they felt really strongly about their opinion. And if I had submitted just because they felt strong, then I'd have been under the same opinion of them. But then I was thinking that actually, after all, it's just that person's opinion. It's not like conclusive Vedic proof. There's no reference from the Vedic Shastra from what the person was saying. They felt very strongly about something based on their perception of what they thought was a moral thing. But for devotees, we have a checking system. What's that? Yep, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So if we feel strongly about something, but then maybe other people don't feel so strong, or they think we're wrong, or someone feels very strongly in the opposite direction, then we can approach the spiritual master and ask, my dear Guru Maharaj, what is the situation with this? Is this right? Is it wrong? Is it something in between? And then, even if the Guru is not there, then other sadhus, other devotees, like Prabhupada says, we should seek out the association of a pure devotee or devotees. Sometimes people think, I can't find a pure devotee, so therefore I reject it all. But Prabhupada didn't give us any excuse. He says, if you can't find a pure devotee, then devotees. And he also said that the association of the worst devotee is better than the association of the best materialist, because at least the worst devotee, no matter how annoying or irritating or hopeless they may seem, they're going to remind you of Krishna. If you're stuck on a desert island, they have this thing on the radio, right? Desert island discs. If you're stuck on a desert island and you had the choice, what would it be? A really famous materialist or some devotee who gets on your nerves? Which one would it be? Don't answer in case you get it wrong. You might say the first one to begin with, but then after a few years you were thinking, I wish I chose that devotee. Because at least you get someone to share Krishna consciousness with. Imagine you were stuck with someone you could never share Krishna consciousness with. So therefore the association of devotees is a very important thing. And even nowadays it's so much more available because we have conference calls, we have video calls like Zoom and other things like that. We can have association with devotees. And many devotees have found that since the pandemic, then they've been able to connect with devotees more than they normally do. And even since things are opening up, to keep that connection going, so we can see this has actually been good for our devotional service. Of course, that's not to say many people have suffered. That's we're not ignoring that fact. In this world, everyone is puffed up with false prestige, despite the failure of all his endeavours. Puffed up. They used to say puffed up like a puri, right? Because the puri, as soon as you take a bite of it, just goes like that. So we puff ourselves up to make ourselves look like something really intelligent, cool, smart, good looking, or whatever. But it's just a very, very thin veneer. And then if that veneer's taken away, we see, oh, you're just chipboard like everyone else. Or we're just, it's a lot of air, hot air. They have this saying in Scotland that, maybe elsewhere as well, that empty vessels make the most sound. So if someone really has to speak their message loudly, it means that they're not that convinced about it. Of course, that's not an absolute thing. Sometimes if spiritual master's shouting at you because you're such a nonsense, it's not like you say, my dear Gurmad, you're an empty vessel. You wouldn't say such a thing. Sometimes the spiritual master will use even anger in the service of the Lord, because just like a parent, if the child's going to do something which is very dangerous, and the parent has tried to explain it nicely, and the child still wants to do it, then the parent may shout at the child, "No, don't do that." One time I was on the street doing books, and one Christian gave me this leaflet, and it was quite clever actually. The leaflet, it showed you on the front picture, some guy had grabbed a girl by the shoulder and he was pulling her back. He looked quite aggressive and she looked terrified. And then you folded it open and it showed you that she was about to step off the curb and there was a bus coming toward her. So sometimes Krishna's like that. We might think, oh, what are you doing? You're disrupting my plans. But he's saving us. We don't know what arrangements Krishna's making, like, oh, there's a diversion, we have to go this way, oh, what a drag. But who knows or maybe we're late in getting out somewhere, and maybe that's Krishna saving us from getting into a car crash or something. We don't know what Krishna's doing. Just like that footsteps in the sand picture they show you of Jesus Christ. There was this famous picture of the sand, there's two sets of footsteps. I think it's someone went through their life and then they seen, at the times of difficulty, there was only one set of footsteps. And then he says, oh, why did you desert me in those difficult times when I needed you most? And he said, that's when I was carrying you. So this is what Krishna, he'll carry what we lack. Sometimes we think we're so qualified, and then sometimes we get a vision to realize that actually it's a wonder I'm doing anything at all. It's by Krishna's mercy that I'm able to do anything, that I can follow these principles even for a day, or that we can do anything. Normally, if I was left to my own devices, who knows where I'd have been. So therefore, when we look at those who are not in Krishna consciousness, then we can think, there go I, but by the grace of God, but by the grace of Krishna. That could easily be me. We don't look down on them thinking, I'm so advanced and you guys are just like stinking rotten karmis. We don't look down on them like that. We look with compassion, thinking that could easily be me. But by the mercy of Krishna, I've been saved from that. People talk about being saved, but saved from what? If they don't even know what the sinful activity is, how can they know they've even been saved? And that's been made very clear. Srila Prabhupada made it so clear. The 4 regulative principles, we follow that, we're avoiding all sinful activity. So if someone really wants to be saved, and this is what it means. And even more than that is Harinama Eva Kevalam. This is our lifeline, taking shelter in the holy name of the Lord. We're just reading in Namarmita the other day, Prabhupada says that one who's chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra has received the mercy of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So if we're thinking, when will I get the mercy of the Lord? If you're chanting, you've already got it. Of course, there's more mercy to come. We shouldn't just become apathetic or lazy, thinking, okay, I've got the mercy, that's good, I can just slacken off now. In the Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada mentions that the devotee is always understanding that there's danger in the material world. So here when Lord Brahma and Lord Indra, King Indra, they were thinking themselves to be the supreme controller, then they forgot that they're not the controller, and they forgot that there's danger in this world for them also. Because even sometimes the great demigods are attacked by great demons as well, who are extremely powerful. They perform great austerities and they get such amazing powers that they can contend with the demigods. But when they become puffed up thinking themselves to be, when the demigods and ourselves become puffed up thinking we're the doer of activities, and then things don't work out, then we may get upset about that. So we have to be willing to bend to Krishna's plan, and we don't often know what that is. We can often see what it is after the fact. I think it was Kadamba Kandaraj said, someone asked him, and have you seen God? He says, I've seen the hand of God many times. So sometimes we can look at that. In any case, the devotee takes the opportunity to try to be an instrument in the hands of the Lord. And we will look back thinking that I could have been more malleable, then that's good. We try to see what could be the plan of the Lord. And if we don't know what that is, then the more we read and the more we chant, become purified and understand this process of Krishna consciousness, then the more we become. And if we bring us to this point of humble state of mind, then we can become more easily engaged in the service of the Lord. So just like there's a worldwide book distribution marathon about to begin 1st of December. And some years ago, Shiva Ram Swami, he had put together some messages for every day of the marathon, and the basis of it was don't get in the way. So Lord Chaitanya's mercy, Krishna's mercy is flowing to all the living entities, and we're supposed to be carrying it out. So in this way, we don't want our false ego to get in the way. It's said that the only distance between Krishna and ourselves is our false ego. And it's only us that's creating that distance. And so we can also remove that. Sometimes out of kindness, Krishna will arrange something to remove it as well. This is Krishna's way of protecting his devotees. When he sees a devotee struggling, trying to be a devotee in the material world, then he'll sometimes lend a hand. And there's another very interesting point here that Prabhupada said, when so-called philanthropists, now when Prabhupada says so-called, that means he doesn't accept them as philanthropists, or that the philanthropist thing itself is actually not a real, it's not the highest welfare. So when they supposedly want to help the poor, they're approached by members of Krishna conscious movement. They say, you're simply wasting your time. So you're wasting your time while I'm feeding vast masses of starving people. But the vast masses of starving people will be there life after life unless the karma has changed. So we're getting to the root of it. If what's causing people to be starving, oh dear, I suspected that. Raghunath, can you take this call from outside? And just tell them I'll be 10 minutes. So when people are, undoubtedly the devotees also are concerned with the suffering of humanity and the suffering of other living entities, of all living entities. So the devotees' compassion is not limited to simply the humans, and it's not limited simply to the body either. Therefore, sarva upakar, the highest welfare work, is that which is giving Krishna consciousness to the living entities. We sometimes give that example. Prabhupada was translating at his desk, and one of his disciples was cleaning his room, and when she came to clean the desk, there was an insect there, and she said, "Oh, Prabhupada, what should I do?" And he said, "Chant to it." So they started chanting Hare Krishna to the little insect. So this is highest welfare work. The devotee sees the spirit soul in everybody's body, and in all species of life, and they always want the welfare for all living entities. And that doesn't exclude feeding starving, because in ISKCON we do that too. But prasadam, it's not just feeding something. Say, for example, someone kills a cow and feeds it to the starving people, then everybody's entangled in that karma. That's not a welfare work, is it? That's in ignorance. That's charity in the mode of ignorance. But the transcendental charity is that which is simultaneously helping their physical situation and their spiritual situation. If the spiritual situation isn't being helped, then the devotees, they're not going to waste their time. So they're saying we're wasting our time, and we're saying they're wasting their time. And who's going to judge it? So we go to Krishna and ask him what he thinks. If you look in Bhagavad Gita, we'll see. Of course, that doesn't mean to say they shouldn't do anything, because Prabhupada also mentioned that material compassion is the beginning of devotion. And we see that in Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna's considerations were material compassion, but later on it became back to yoga. And we see that quite often people who have got some material compassion, at least they're seeing beyond the suffering of themselves, which is a good thing. That's a start of devotion as well, because they begin to see that somebody's suffering worse than themselves. And we can pretty much always think this, when we're thinking, woe is me, we can always see there's someone worse off than ourselves. So this chanting of a Hare Krishna mantra, offering all our food to Krishna, of course, making sure that all the food we offer to Krishna is offerable, and reading these transcendental literatures so that we can understand what is this Krishna consciousness. We can understand the process of becoming Krishna conscious, and we can understand also the pastimes of the Lord. Then this is the highest welfare work. And in this regard, charity begins at home, so we have to take care of ourselves first. But at the same time, that doesn't mean to say we have to become like the pure devotee Mahabhagavat before we can even do anything to help anybody. Prabhupada said, whatever we've learned, we give it to others. Even if we think, oh, I don't really know much about Krishna consciousness, well, what you know is a lot more than some people who know nothing. So we can give that. And even we think, well, I don't know anything about Krishna consciousness, but it's in these books, and it's helped me a lot, and I'm sure it can help you too, because it applies to everybody. It's not a sectarian thing. It's a spiritual science. It applies to everybody. Sectarian would mean it would depend on your belief. But if someone just foolishly says, well, I don't believe water's wet, so I'm not going to drink it. I'm just going to drink iron brew. Say, wait, but there's water in iron brew. Or I'm just going to drink whiskey, but there's water in that as well. It might be called the water of life, but it won't give you much life. So it's not really based on belief. It's called Sanatan Dharma, like the Dharma of water is wet, the Dharma of fire is heat and light. That is the nature of it. And the Dharma of the living entity is to serve. And nobody can get out of that. Even some of these so-called big leaders in the world, as soon as people get the idea that they're not going to serve our purposes, then they're out. They may initially get there saying, yes, I will serve you this, I'll do this, and they make all these promises. And then they get into power and they think, look at all the money which is my disposal. I can stick that in my bank account, and I can do this and I can do that. And all these promises that I made, I don't have to keep, because now that I'm in the high chair, then everyone will just do what I say. But they forget they're not even the controller of the government, that people will remove them. And even some people who may become tyrants, and eventually people, they will get tired of being ruled by fear, and they'd rather die than be living in fear. So I remember being on Sanktan one time, and I was actually felt quite intimidated by the onslaught of people coming towards us. And then I thought, so I became quite timid, and then I thought, I'm just going to, is this what it's going to be? I'm just going to be timid, get nowhere. And what am I afraid of anyway? There's this saying, afraid of the day you never saw. So I thought, what's happened anyway in the past? What's the worst that can happen? And you think, what's the worst that can happen? Then it doesn't matter. So you just give up your fear and just dive into it, get into it. There's a book which was written, was it Susan Jeffries, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. So just because we feel afraid, it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't do it. Like when your friends are swimming in the sea and you're thinking, it's a bit cold. Okay, you can be afraid of the water, but once you get in there, you'll be enjoying the same as the rest of them. Don't be afraid to surrender to Krishna. Don't be afraid to take steps forward in Krishna consciousness, because Krishna will protect us. He makes that promise that his devotee will never perish, because Mantavya, he is mine. And Krishna knows how difficult it is to become a devotee in the material world. So he gives particular attention to the living entities trying to be a devotee. We've been under the spell of Maya for so long, but we have to avoid certain things. Therefore, we read the 10 offences every day so we can avoid these things, which makes the path of devotional service conducive for us. So this Daridra Narayan, does anybody know what Daridra Narayan means? Poor Narayan. Yeah. Would you like to explain it?
I think my understanding is that, especially it was one Mayavadi philosopher, Vivekananda, I think it was, and he made it very popular, that in one sense, yeah, God is everywhere within everyone's heart, but then, then they're still negating God, they're still sort of trying to step over God. And so they say that, by serving the poor people, they're directly serving God. So again, it's subtly negating God, but it's very attractive to some people, because then they start thinking, well, I'm God as well.
Mm-hmm. That's it, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Daridra Narayan means poor Narayan. So the impersonalist thinks everybody's God. So why we should give to the God who's already opulent, we give to the God who's poor. Daridra Narayan, we're all Narayan. But this is obviously wrong, because they're forgetting one thing, that when Krishna is satisfied, then everyone is satisfied. When we pour water on the root of the tree, the whole tree is satisfied. So Krishna being Sarva Karana Karanam, the cause of all causes, and Anadir Adir Govinda, the origin of whom there is no, who has no origin. Then when we satisfy Krishna, then everyone is satisfied. And by doing so, also we relieve ourselves from karma. So simply by performing some altruistic or philanthropic activity, it doesn't relieve one from karma. Sometimes tragically, sometimes people take their own life, but that doesn't stop the karma which is due. Sometimes people suffer so much they think, oh, just give it up. And unfortunately, that doesn't solve it either. So there's no escaping the law of karma. Therefore, philanthropic activities are considered to be blowing on the boil. The boil may be giving some pain, so we just give it some temporary relief by blowing on it. We'll feed them for today, but who knows what's going to be the next thing. Perhaps it'll be a drought or a flood. Sometimes the same countries, they're under a drought and then they're under a flood. It's such havoc. But therefore, Krishna consciousness is the only real remedy. And like Prabhupada was mentioning in the Leela Amrita there about the new United Nations, that United Nations under the one flag, not under many flags. This is one Back to Godhead magazine article I read just before I joined the temple, and there was a picture showing all the flags outside the United Nations. I was interested even just with the title, but Prabhupada said, so many flags means divided nations. It should be one flag. You could say, well, they have the United Nations flag, but they all still have their own flags. So that means they're all looking after their own, looking after number one first, whether it be themselves or extended self, nation, etc. But if the whole planet is under one flag and we care for everybody as one society, then there'll be no shortages. And Prabhupada said that even if everyone becomes vegetarian, at least even the weather will get better. And we're finding that the environmentalists are discovering that this meat industry is a big cause of problems for the environment. So, and it's so interesting that Prabhupada would just say like a couple of words, and then it's a whole, it's a lifetime's work for someone, or becomes a worldwide concern, and Prabhupada gives a simple solution for it. So when people come to the point where they realize that we're materially exhausted, we've tried everything, and then they find Krishna consciousness, Brahmanda Brahmatikonya Bhagavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhaktilata Bij. So the living entities wandering through so many species throughout the whole universe. And finally, when they turn to God, wondering what's it all about, then Krishna will direct them from within the heart to meet a bona fide spiritual master. Okay, we'll just stop there. Does anyone get any quick question?
So before you were talking about people who got clever, you were talking about how there are times when we have to you said before how sometimes we have to act as some sort of fast depending on each and we have some power in some situation. And I'm wondering how to people that are in that situation and not think yourself the boss and still act.
That's a good question. Because we just remind ourselves that actually this is a service. It's like the spiritual master. Sometimes people have this misconception that the spiritual master is some big fat cat who is living off the fat of his gullible disciples. But the real spiritual master, he's the greatest servant because Prabhupada said that it's very difficult to control your mind, but it's even more difficult to control other people's minds. Not that we're trying to do some mind control or something, but if we're trying to control our mind and senses, and then you're trying to encourage someone else to do the same, or to engage yourself in Krishna consciousness, it's certainly much easier than trying to engage other people. It has added austerities, isn't it? So we're taking that austerity as a service. Sometimes it's good, it's a great help if we've got a goal to achieve and then we've got extra helping hands, then we think that's great. And Prabhupada said we have to learn to encourage people by bending without breaking. So this is an art of engaging other people. So our service may be to engage others in service, which is a very responsible service. And therefore we have to make sure that we are a good example. So that way we can keep ourselves clear from thinking that I'm the controller, I'm your boss, and you're subordinate to me. At any moment, these roles could be reversed, couldn't they? If someone shows better standard than us, then everyone might say, oh, we want that person to be in charge, and then you're having to be the humble servant. I guess the thing is that we're all actually humble servants, and we don't take the credit. We pass on that credit. Like even Srila Prabhupada, we can see how wonderful a devotee he is, unparalleled with everything he did, and yet still he wouldn't take the credit. He would give the credit to his disciples, he'd give the credit to his spiritual master. So therefore, if we can pass on the credit, and also we can understand that this is my service. If it's your service to tell people what to do, then whatever service we have to do, it's always going to have some austerities. Sometimes we think, oh, I'd rather do this. Then you go there and then you find some austerity and then I'd rather do that. And the more we keep changing, then the sooner we keep wanting to change to the next one, till there's nothing we can do. So whatever service we've got, we accept that this is what Krishna has given me. This is the arrangement of the Lord. So let me just try to become better in that service. Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, we'll just stop there. It's Guru ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.